Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Susan Kafle. I hope that you guys are doing well. Today I want to discuss about the light reflex, accommodation reflex, and the vertical gaze. These are important topics if we want to understand the concepts of different syndromes in the midbrain. So without a delay, let's get started. In this video, I'll be talking about the location of the oculomotor nucleus in the midbrain, the pathway of the light reflex and the accommodation reflex, and then the vertical gaze. So this is a section of the midbrain. Now in the midbrain, if we see closely, in the tegmentum we have two nuclei of the oculomotor nerve. One is the motor nucleus, the other is the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. These are located at the level of the superior colliculus. Remember, this is a section of the midbrain at the level of the superior colliculus. At the level of inferior colliculus, we don't have these nuclei. We rather have the nuclei of the trochlear nerve. All right, and from these nuclei, the fibers, they descend downwards and exit ventrally or anteriorly. This is anterior portion, this is the posterior portion. They exit anteriorly to reach the eyes. So let's discuss quickly about the light reflex. As the light falls on the retina, the impulse is carried by the optic nerve through the optic chiasm. One of its fibers crosses to the other side, whereas one of the fibers remain on the same side. So through the optic chiasm into the optic tract, and then instead of going to the visual cortex, which usually happens when we are seeing something, in case of light reflex, it bypasses this visual cortex circuit. It rather goes directly to the midbrain where the pretectal nuclei are located. So this one over here is the pretectal nucleus. Once in the pretectal nucleus, it synapses with the second order neurons, and the neurons cross bilaterally into the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, and from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, it gives rise to the third order neurons that travel along the oculomotor nerve, reach the ciliary ganglion, and from the ciliary ganglion, the short ciliary nerves supply the ciliary muscles and the pupillary constrictors and our pupil constricts. So as you can see, the fibers are crossing here in the midline of the posterior portion. So this place where the fibers are crossing, it is called the posterior commissure. And since the fibers are crossing, when light is shown in one eye, the other eye also constricts. So that is the indirect pupillary light reflex. Direct pupillary light reflex is when the pupil constricts in the eye where you are shining the light, and indirect is when the pupil of the other eye constricts. All right. Now, what is the accommodation reflex? It is also called near reflex. So whenever some object is approaching from distant to our near side, what happens is three things occur at the same time. The three things are: the pupil will constrict, there will be increased convexity of the lens, like if this is our lens, this is the retina. When the object is far, the light is falling on the retina. If the lens does not change its size and the object is approaching near, what happens is the light will go and fall behind the retina and cannot focus. So for the light to fall on the retina as the object is approaching closer, what should happen is this lens should become more convex so that it can refract the light more. So this is the second thing that will occur, that is the increased convexity of the lens. And then we'll have the convergence of the eyes. If you experiment with yourself, as you are seeing a pen approach nearer to your eyes, you'll notice that your eyes are looking towards the medial side. So the medial rectus muscles of both the eyes are contracting to bring the eyes closer towards the midline. So these the three constitute the accommodation reflex. Now, how does the accommodation reflex occur? We said that the light reflex, it is occurring because the pathway is bypassing the visual cortex. But in case of the accommodation reflex, it does not bypass the visual cortex. What happens is, when light shines on the retina, optic nerve carries it through the optic chiasm into the optic tract, and then it reaches the lateral geniculate body. From the lateral geniculate body, we have this neuron projecting to the visual cortex. These are the optic radiations, right? And from the visual cortex, it will synapse with different neurons over there, and rather than the visual cortex, this is the frontal eye field area. Visual cortex projects to the frontal eye field area, and from the frontal eye field area we have another neuron traveling towards the midbrain, not into the pretectal nuclei but into a nuclei that is anterior or ventral to the pretectal nucleus. So that is the near reflex center in the midbrain. So I've highlighted it with this blue circles, with these blue circles, right? And once in the midbrain, from these nuclei come other neurons that cross bilaterally, as you can see over here. They cross bilaterally to reach the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, and then they cross bilaterally to reach the motor nucleus. So they are supplying both the nuclei in the midbrain. And from both of these nucleus, one fiber is traveling anteriorly from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus via this tract. So this is the optic nerve that is reaching the ciliary ganglion, and from the motor nuclei it is traveling forwards and supplying the medial rectus muscle. So because our ciliary ganglion is stimulated as a result of this pathway, there will be constriction of the pupil and increased convexity of the lens. And because the medial recti muscle are also contracting, we will have convergence of the eyes. So three things that constitute the accommodation reflex occur in this manner. One thing you should remember in this is, this reflex is taking place with the help of the visual cortex. The light is reaching the visual cortex, it is not bypassing it. And the other thing is, there are separate nuclei where the projections from the cerebral cortex occur, and these are not the pretectal nuclei. This is relevant. Why? Because if we have a lesion over here in the posterior midbrain, it tries to compress the structures that are present at the back. So what will it compress? The pretectal nuclei will compress, and the posterior commissure, which is present in this posterior part of the midbrain, so they will get compressed and will have the symptoms accordingly. I'll discuss this in another slide. Now let's understand what I just said with this diagram, that it's showing the brain from the lateral side. So this portion over here is the midbrain. All right. When the I'll discuss the light reflex first. When light is shown on the eye, it will travel through the brain, does not reach the visual cortex. It directly bypasses the visual cortex and reaches the midbrain, and then give the light reflex. But in case of accommodation reflex, as the light is shown over here, the light passes to the visual cortex. From the visual cortex, it projects to the frontal eye field area over here, and from the frontal eye field area, it will project downwards into the midbrain to a center or to a nucleus which is ventral or anterior to this normal pretectal nuclei. So this difference you have to know, because if you want to understand the manifestations of Parinode syndrome or the one of the dorsal midbrain syndromes, then this becomes relevant. Say that you have a lesion over here, and you have your pretectal nucleus. The black one is the pretectal nucleus. So the Parinode syndrome is likely to compress the pretectal nucleus, but not the nucleus where the uh, fibers are descending, where the descending fibers from the frontal eye field area project. So this one, the anterior one, is the uh, near reflex nucleus of midbrain. All right. So now let's discuss how the vertical gaze happens. Whenever you are trying to look in a certain direction, there are two types of movements that can occur. One is called the saccade, the other is the pursuit. What is a saccade? It is a sudden brief movement that occurs in response to some noxious stimuli, like you have someone pricking your right arm and you suddenly move your eyes towards the right direction. So that is a saccade. That is a brief sudden movement that is coordinated with the help of this area called the frontal eye field area. What is a pursuit? Pursuit is the movement of the pursuit means the movement of the eyes in a certain direction when you are following a tracking object. For example, you are seeing a bird fly from left to right, then you follow the bird with the help of your eyes moving towards the right side from the left. So that is a pursuit. When you are following some object, it is called a pursuit. Whereas if you are making a sudden quick movement, it is called a saccade. The pursuit is not occurring because of the frontal eye field area, rather it is occurring due to the stimulation of the parieto-occipital temporal area. All right, these send the fibers to the midbrain or the pons depending on what type of movement is occurring, and then the movement happens. Now let's see how the vertical gaze occurs. Say that this is a frontal eye field area. These are the frontal eye field areas, and you are trying to make the movement upwards. What the frontal eye field areas do is they send these descending fibers to the nuclei that are located in the midbrain. These nuclei are called the rostral interstitial medial longitudinal fasciculus. I know that this is a very long name, but you don't need to memorize this. You can just know the concept behind the gaze, right? In short, we can call this RIMLF. All right. Now, after the stimulus reaches the midbrain, what will happen is we have the fibers from the RIMLF crossing to the other side behind the cerebral aqueduct. This is the cerebral aqueduct. So we have the fibers crossing over here, and then they supply the subnuclei of the different muscles of the eyes. The oculomotor nerve supplies to both the inferior rectus and the superior rectus. The inferior rectus subnucleus is located laterally. The superior rectus subnucleus is located medially. And if you see closely, the inferior rectus subnucleus is receiving input from the same side as well as the opposite side, whereas the superior rectus subnucleus is receiving the input only from the opposite side. So if you have a tumor compressing the midbrain from back, say there is a tumor over here, a pinealoma over here at the back of the midbrain that is compressing the midbrain, what it does is this tumor predominantly compresses the posterior commissure. Posterior commissure means where the fibers cross. So it compresses the posterior commissure, sparing the RIMLF and the different subnuclei. As a result of this, we will have the weakness or the impairment of only the supply to the superior rectus muscle, not the inferior rectus muscle, because the inferior, even if there is a compression over here, the inferior recti are going to receive the input from the ipsilateral side from the RIMLF. So in Parinode syndrome, which occurs because of the compression of the midbrain at the level of the superior colliculus by tumors like pinealoma, we will only have upward gaze palsy. All right, but in diseases like progressive supranuclear palsy, the problem is not here behind the midbrain. Rather, the problem occurs at a supranuclear level. That is why it gets its name, the supranuclear palsy. So the problem is occurring over here or here. So the supply is cut off, and you cannot move your eyes upwards or downwards because both the supplies to the superior and the inferior recti are compromised. So that would be it for this video, guys. Have a great day. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye.